Sorry, it's been quite some time since I last recorded a YouTube video. I think it's been now probably 5 months. It's not because I wasn't enjoying doing the YouTube, it was purely because my equipment, I'd had quite a few comments saying that the video quality was quite blurry, and in fairness, it really was. I was using some quite old equipment. I was running it on an old TV monitor and a really old computer. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do that was just to show what you can do with an old computer, but also I thought it probably was time to upgrade, so I haven't gone mad. I've still got my Razer laptop that I'm using for a lot of production, but I've also bought a Dell i7. It's like a 6th gen, so it's like 4 years old, from eBay, and I think that was a couple of £100. And I've bought a 4K monitor, and again, I got that for a couple of £100, and it's really good. And in fact, I think I'll probably do a YouTube video on that, on the setup, you know, what you can achieve with a 400 quid's worth of equipment. I think that could be quite interesting. But what I wanted to do, just to get back into YouTube, hopefully over the summer we'll do a fair few videos, but I wanted to look at if we took say a riser or a sample, you know, if we take it from a sample pack, either from Cubase, or if we took it from say Splice, or one of the, you know, there's so many loops you can get on the internet, and as long as they're royalty free, you can use them in your productions, no problem at all. But what I thought we could look at really quickly is effects that I use to make things perhaps more unique to me, and also a way of, if you took a sample that say 1,000 people have used, by using these effects you can make them unique, and then they will sound totally different to if someone else is using that same sample. And also, these are a couple of plugins that I've kind of ignored in Cubase a little bit, you know, really good plugins that I've got. I don't know why, but they took a bit of a back seat for me. But anyway, let's have a look. So we're in Cubase, I've made a new project, and all I'm going to do is to this, I've got my guitar for some reason, let me get rid of that. And I'll just unplug it, sorry. The right zone. So do you remember this zonal system? So you've got your left zone, your lower zone, and then the right zone. And we're going to look at the right zone to get a sample. We're just going to choose a riser and try and make this more unique. Now, I think if you're on something before 8.5, you may not have this zone system up the top right. So you may have to use the old F5 to get the media bay to get the sample from. And then I quite often, I suppose because I'm a creature of habit, I quite often still use that, even though I've got these zones now. But so we're going to use the right zone. I'm going to go to loops and samples, and I'm simply going to write a riser, and let's take the first one that comes up, and I'm going to left click on it and drag it into my project. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'll make that slightly bigger. And by pressing G and H, I can zoom in and out. So let's make that a little bit so we can see it. Okay. That's pretty good. What we're going to have, with a riser, they're great for adding interest. So when you go from, say, the verse to a chorus of a song, or, you know, to split sections, it sort of gives you the idea that something's going to happen. So like reverses, also like a symbol that you can reverse, anything like that. And also, in effect, you can embed these in your tracks in various places, and like ear candy, they call it, on a vocal loop or something like that. So if you took a part of the vocal, chucked it down onto another track, use some of these plugins and just mash the vocal up, and then just sort of blend it in with the original vocal in places, and it just adds interest. So it could be the simple case of your first verse, you haven't got this riser or this effect, but in the second verse you have, and the listener may not even realise that you've added that in. But what will happen is, of course, it will keep people's interest because it's developing the song, it's doing something different in the second verse. Anyway, so looking at this, the first thing I'm going to do is probably get this into time. And I'll tell you what else, looking at this, I don't want any of this second section. I want to cut it here. So, do you remember when you Click on an audio event. Once you've dragged it into your project, you can use these bottom, well, in fact, all the corners on an audio event will do something. You've got a fade out at the top right, a fade in the top left, and you can change where the audio event starts, or if I go to the bottom right, where it finishes, and that's the one I want. And what I want to do is try and grab this here. So you see you've got this big, this is sort of like the loudest part of this riser, and that's where I'm going to end my sample. So I'm going to move this across just by simply dragging on the bottom right. We left click down and drag it as close as I can to the end. Now I've already hit a slight problem. If we see here, that's fine, but I'd quite like to add, I want to keep this little section here. Let me press H to add that, bring that out. I want to keep that in there. So using the snap function, do you remember snap? This is how you want either the event, audio event, or MIDI with snap, where those increments you want to work in. I'm trying to think of a better word, but it's probably better for me to demonstrate. So at the moment I'm snapping because I've got this on, this symbol here. A quick shortcut as well, J for that, to switch it on and off. Now at the moment that's snapping to a bar. If I went to beat, it would now snap to each one of these beats in the bar. So can you see now it's snapping to the beat? Now we're pretty close. Can you see here, this is where I want to be. So maybe I'm going to try quantize. If I use quantize, you can set the increment as well here. So I could go for a bar, half bar, a quarter note, an eighth note, or 16th of a bar, or 32. So if I go to 32 now, it's still not close enough. So I could, I suppose, go to 64 and it would be, but it probably makes sense for me at this point to press J or hit snap, take snap off, and then try and edit it as close as possible to that. And I can press H to bring this out, and then using this bottom right, get it so it ends right at the end of that. Now I don't have to be too specific with that. Okay, so we've got this now. We've got our riser. This is going to take us from the end of my verse into the chorus. Another slight problem here. Say my chorus started at the start of bar 3. This riser's carrying on past the bar. So this is where I'd use beat stretch. Now, if you press 1 on your keyboard twice, you see you've got this kind of, next to my cursor there, you see this kind of clock appears. That's beat stretch. Now what I'm going to do is put snap back on, because if I don't have snap back on, I can beat stretch this anywhere, which is great. But what I want with snap on, and I'm going to set it to bar, so I've got snap back on, and remember J if you want a quick shortcut, snap it back to bar, and literally now drag it to the left slightly and it snaps to the nearest bar, and then I can press 1 again to go back to my normal object selection on my normal cursor. So now I've got my sort of, I suppose, the sample in its rawest form that I'm going to use, and then my chorus is going to start. Now that's already different to the Cubase loop that I've got from Media Bay up here. So remember, using these zones to go to Media Bay, I went to the right zone, Media, and I just searched it up there. But I think what we can do with this is now look at these effects. Now, to get effects up in Cubase, as long as you've got the track selected, you can click the E button there, or also on each track you've got the edit channel, the little E there, and this is your channel strip. And again, perhaps we'll look at this in more detail, but all I'm interested in today are these insert effects. So my first insert, I'm going to hover above my first insert, and I'm going to go to modulation, and I'm going to choose something called the chopper, and it basically says what it does. It chops the audio. So if I've got it on this, the problem at the moment, it's not doing a lot of chopping because I've got it to start at every bar. Now under speed, I'm going to set that to probably 8th notes, so you'd have 8 of them per bar. So now I'll take him back to the beginning. Okay, that's already sounding cooler. That's great. And now these are how you want to chop the event. So I'll probably go to something like this. You can be really abrupt, and you can see how this was going to clip it off, so which is pretty cool actually. And then you can blend that using the mix. So the mix on any plugin, if you have the mix on full, it's going to affect the whole of the signal, and if you bring it down, it tells you the percentage. So that would be 32, so it would affect 32% of the audio that we've got there, or the event, but it would leave the rest of it unaffected, and that's called our wet and dry mix a lot of times. So I'm going to keep it on 100, why not? We'll do that, and I'll probably let's use this form. But now, instead of it just doing that continuous chopping sound, what I'm going to do is use automation. And do you remember before we looked at automation? But really quickly, if you press right on any plugin, read arms as well, because what's going to happen is any automation, any changes, parameter changes you're doing in that plugin are also it's going to read it as it goes, which is great. So we've got read and write on. So by pressing the right button, read comes on. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the depth of this down, so it's not going to start with any chopping. And as the riser moves up in volume, so gets greater in volume, I'm actually then going to bring up my depth. So if I press play, and I'm literally now, because right's on, oh, I was a bit slow there. Okay, now I'm going to take right off. So I've clicked right off. And the great thing about Cubase is any automation changes you make, it makes a lane for you. Let me just make that a bit smaller. So you know how slow I was there? I can literally move that now. And then, sorry, get rid of those if I want as well. You don't have to. You can do anything you want with these. So we've got our chopper that's starting right at the beginning with nothing and increasing as it goes, so we're getting that chopping effect becomes more apparent. So that's the first one I look at. And if you've got just a vocal sample and you want to make it sound slightly different, just straight out the box, that thing is great, it does that. So now if we click E again, another one I've used a lot recently in the modulation is the Autopan. So I've just clicked under the next effect. Now, let me move this. In fact, I can get rid of that behind. Autopan is the same as panning between left and right, and you always have this in Cubase here. So this is your panner here, or if you go to your channel strip, you can also see it on the right hand side here. This is your panning. So you could click right and actually draw that information in, but I think the beauty of the auto panner is you can just set it and forget about it. So this is your left and this is your right here, and what we can do, again, one thing I forgot to mention in the last one is don't forget you got all these presets to go through in any Cubase plugin, which are really good, definitely worth looking at. So, but all I'm doing here is probably completely messing it up, but because this would be hard right here and hard left at the top, I'm not doing it sort of 100% left and right, hard left and right. I've gone to some more sort of 50, a bit less there, but you can change those as you go. You can also change the amount of width it's moving across as well, and the speed as well. So you can also do that. You could automate that. So starting quite slow and getting faster if you want. But I'm just going to set it to something. Let's see. So that's a really cool effect. And again, that's made it sound, I think from what we had at the beginning, it's already sounding really different. Now, if I click on this E again, one I do use a lot, on my third insert, I'm going to add in, I've completely forgotten, under filter, step filter, which is, there, sorry, I couldn't find him. If actually, saying that, if you can't ever remember what a plugin is, because we've got a memory like mine, God, I can't remember what day of the week it is, so you can actually write it in the top here, in this area here, and it'll help you find it. So I knew it was called step filter, so and we can load it up. Now this can really mangle an audio effect or a MIDI track in no time at all, which is great, because if you want to say you've got a vocal and you want it to sound completely different really quickly, you can add this on and it changes the cutoff and resonance. And again, you've got a ton of different presets if you want to work with them, but we get this kind of sound. And again, probably what I would do with this is maybe not have the mix so it affecting the whole signal. I'll bring this perhaps down a bit, say to 32, and also instead of working to 1/4, probably go to 8, so 1/8 of a bar. And again, you can automate these and perhaps glide some of it. You can change the bass resonance. Maybe we could look at this and as a plugin of its own at some point in its own right. Okay, so already that sample, which is going to become my sort of riser to go to from the verse to the chorus, is sounding completely different already. The only thing I'd suggest now is once we get to the end of bar 2, it just completely dies away. There's nothing there, so we've got to put some effect that's going to have some sort of tail to it. So I'd suggest a reverb or a delay. And in fact, why don't we add both really quick? So what I'm going to do is click on the E. I'm going to add a delay, but what I'm going to add is a stereo delay. The reason being is because it's going to affect what's happening differently to the left and right speakers, and it's going to add even more stereo width. So I'll set the left hand side delay to 1/4, and maybe the right hand side to 1/2 or 1/8. Let's go 1/2. So this is going to be a halves and this is going to be quarters. So we can actually change the feedback, how long the delay lasts, and the mix again, the dry signal and the wet signal, but I'm keeping this pretty standard at the moment. And then, in fact, should we hear that? And then let's add the reverb in. Can you hear how that is now dying away rather than just abruptly ending? Okay, now let's do exactly the same with the reverb. So I'm going to scroll down to my reverbs. I'm going to go to Roomworks, because everyone, if they've got Cubase, should have Roomworks in there. I'm going to make the pre-delay so it comes in pretty quick. This is the pre-delay of the reverb here. And I'm going to make the time a lot more as well. Just bring up the time, which is going to make that reverb tail longer. Maybe with this, let's have a listen. But if I get rid of this, let's have a listen to it. You see how that reverb is really affecting even the intro of my fade. I might use the old automation trick again, so it starts off very dry and then the reverb develops. So by putting read and write on, so pressing right, play it, I'm going to bring up and then back down. Okay, now I'll take right off, so just leave read on. And as I said before, the beauty of Cubase, having automation lanes created for you out of any automation you do, is great because you can sort of go back and edit it later. So you might say, I want to get rid of these and make the slope much smoother towards the end, or I want the tail to start here. You can do that quite easily, which is great. Okay, so we've got something really different to as we had it before. And in fact, in Cubase, if you press the E and go to your channel strip, you can actually bypass all of the effects and see how it sounded before. This is sort of bypassing the effects. That's what we had before. And now we've got something completely different. Now, we could use that, and then if I press G to minimize this down, let me change the color as well. So don't forget at the top, if you're working with something you want to change the color, you've got this palette here. We can change the color. Now I could say I want the verse by left clicking on it and moving the event, holding Alt, and then let going of left click. I can make this would be my first verse to the chorus, second, third. So I've got my 3 events. So that was basically just left clicking on the event, drag it where you want with left click still down, press Alt, and then let go left click. But I think with this, what I'll probably want to do is render this down and export it, so I can use it. Not only is it easier to use, because once it exports out or renders down, these are the two options, it will take all of these effects and all of my automation and just create it into a WAV file that I can use, or a WAV file that I can use all the time. So it will take much less processor power. Let me get rid of this right zone. So it will take much less processor power just for a short effect. I don't want all of those plugins running. And also it means that if I was working on another track and I wanted this effect, I can have it in my media bay like all my other samples, ready to use, and I know it's there. So let's have a look at exporting it first of all. So with an export, it's the locator at the top which is the most important thing. So I want my export to start here, and I want it to go to the end of bar 4, because of now we've got this sort of delay and reverb tail. So that's my export's going to start here. Let me expand this out and end here. And then what I would do if you've got many tracks is solo, because it'll export them all together, and that's the beauty of an export. It'll take all your 10 tracks, say, and export them down to a stereo WAV file that you can use. But what I'm going to do would, if I was just wanted this effect, I'd solo it, so it wasn't exporting any of my other tracks. Not that I've got to worry with this. And then I would go File, Export, Audio Mixdown. I would name it, so Matt Rise, say. This is the file path of where it's going to send it to, so you can choose anywhere by clicking on there in your computer. And then I've got it saved as a WAV file, 44.1 24-bit. Now I installed Cubase on this a couple of days ago, and this was obviously the default, but you can change that to whatever you want, MP3 or, and then we press export. And it's telling me the file already exists. I've got something called Matt Rise. Well, I'm not interested in keeping it anyway, so I'm going to overwrite that. And it's export. That's a quite a handy thing to stop you writing over anything that you've done before. If you are wondering what sort of bit rate you're working in, under project at the top, along the top, you can actually go to project setup, and it will tell you down here on the bottom left. So my sample rate is 44.1 and it's 24-bit, so that's fine. But now I've exported that out to that destination, I can then use that on any other song I wanted to work on. But say I was in this project and I had, say, 10 tracks, but I knew I wanted to work on this. I know I want this to occur more, but without all the plugins and this hassle of all this automation, I can simply use the render in place function. So you highlight the audio event you want, you go to edit, sorry, my computer's, and then render in place. And now what I'm going to look at is settings really quickly for this. Now I think let me take it to what you would get. I think this is standard when you get Cubase installed. It's dry, so it's not using any effects, so I want my whole signal path. I'm not worried about the master effects because I haven't got any master effects on here, so not that it would make any difference if I had that on, but I'm going to do my whole signal path, and then I'm also going to use this tail mode option, because at the moment with it off, it's going to export, it's going to render my WAV file onto another track and end it here. But I want this reverb and delay tail I've made, so I can choose seconds or beats and bars. I'm going to choose beats and bars, and I'm going to choose, well, it's on 2-bar tail. You can change it to anything there just by typing it in. Now it's changed back to 1. Let me change it back to 2. So hopefully with that on, it's going to render this audio file down here, and it's going to end it 2 bars after the event, so I've got that reverb tail. And the only other thing I use a lot, this mute source event, which I can understand why that is a default, but I usually keep it on, keep source unchanged. The reason being, if you want to make a few effects really quickly, it's not, you can still work with this really quickly. Not that it doesn't make much difference. I just keep that on unchanged and then render down. So hit render, and there's our effect. So I've muted this one now, and that's what we've created. Now if you find, because of the effects I've used and the levels I've used, it's actually quite low in volume. If you wanted to bring that up, do you remember when we click on an audio event and you get this little box appearing at the top middle? I can literally drag up to make that event louder, which is great. So that's your clip gain, make it quieter and louder, which is quite cool. Okay, and now I'm going to change the color of that. Now I've made this, I don't need this anymore because I've created it. So I'm going to right click here and click remove selected tracks, and there's a shortcut for that as well. In fact, it was written there. So remove select track, you see you got shift and delete together, we'll do that. But you can right click and select remove track if you want, or shift delete. Okay, so now I've deleted that track, all of those plugins and all the processor power they were using and all the automation is gone. So this has made me my original, well, relatively original effect or riser, and with all the effects, and they've been printed inside it, so they're printed to it now. So that would be my build to my first chorus, and then you know what we said before, you moving them around. So this would be my second chorus. Let me bring this in a bit, and my third chorus. Now remember, by doing that, you left click on the event, drag it where you want, press Alt with left click still down, then let go of left click. You can use the copy, just your standard copy and paste if you want to move it as well. Now the beauty of now this being audio is the fact I've got three the same, but sorry, I won't go on too much longer. There's so many things you can do, but say this second one, just by clicking on it in Cubase, you've got all of these things here. So I might want to do a transpose, so bring it down in pitch. So I can drag up to bring it up, to move it up in pitch, should I say, and drag it down to move it down in pitch. So if I went -3, that's 3 semitones lower. So it already sounds massively different to that one, just because I've lowered the pitch by using the transpose function there. And then under audio in your menu, you might want to do something like under processes here, reverse. So I'm going to put here new version because I don't want it to affect these two. And can you see it's reversed this one where these have been left the same. So now this is completely different to that one. And that was just literally two different processes that I did. And I know this sounds probably quite weird with those effects in isolation, but now we've made them, perhaps I'll put them into a track so you can see that with them blended in, the volume quite low, it'll add the effect, but it won't be like, what's that strange noise coming in here? Because they will be sort of blended in, embedded in, so you won't necessarily notice them, but they will be there, and it will add to either, you can even use them just as in the middle of a verse, just to add a little bit of something different. And also, if you like sections, don't forget, by moving this around, by clicking on the bottom left or the bottom right, you can choose where it starts and ends. And if I went from here, that would be quite an abrupt start. But remember your fade in, fade outs. So the top left and top right now. So you could make something completely different for just a little section in the verse. But that's sort of, you know, how I would create something slightly more unique from a generic loop or an effect, just to, you know, just to mix things up a bit. And there are, you know, there's endless things you can do, but just as a really quick sort of fix for making something more unique to you. Okay, good luck.